Hey everyone, I'm Mary Beth Jusu from Dread Central, and I am here today with Nikyatu Jusu, the director of the all-new film Nanny. How are you?
You know what? I'm losing my voice, but I'm good.
I can imagine. You're at TIFF, right? So it's
Yeah,
a little bit
yeah.
crazy.
It is. It's a lot crazy, but it's humbling. Like the love has been so humbling.
That's amazing. So my first question for you was I wanted to hear more about kind of the folklore influences in Nanny. Obviously, it's got a lot of social commentary going on, but there's also these really awesome kind of folkloric aspects, and I'd love to hear more about those from you.
Yeah, Anansi the spider and Mami Wata are the two figures that I chose to incorporate into this story. And I really love them because one, I mean, they're two of the more prevalent African diasporic figures that people are somewhat familiar with. A lot of people are not familiar thoroughly, but there is a subset of people who know them deeply. They're two different figures who represent forms of resistance for African diasporic people pre-colonialism, during enslavement. And so I was really curious about the ways that we've navigated survival. But I also love fantasy and I enjoy telling stories that give people wish fulfillment. Like I wish that I could see the magic around me at times of struggle. I tend to not like to tell a straightforward dramatic story. So Anansi is a chaos agent, and so he's a spider that represents like the tiny person who has no power, which is why he's in the form of a small spider, a small but mighty spider. And he's a figure that influences people to kind of burn shit down. And I'm always really interested in the in resistance that fights back in ways that are not glorified in our society. You know, nonviolence and nonviolent protest is always praised, but it's like, okay, I'm supposed to respond to my violent oppression with peacefulness. And so I'm always interested in ways that people resist uh, in ways that are rebellious. And then Mami Wata is a cunning, seductive, capitalistic figure that is, you know, visibly looks like a mermaid and encompasses water spirits. Water is a big motif in my work. I think water is just so important for African diasporic people for various reasons. It represents birth, it represents rebirth, it represents death. And Toni Morrison, one of my favorite writers, has a quote that says, water has perfect memory. And I think about that a lot and the ways that, you know, mermaid figures have been utilized organically in our folklore.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. I agree with the whole burning shit down too there. Like it's incredible. But you this is your first feature, but you made Suicide by Sunlight, which was an incredible short film, and you work a lot in kind of the horror genre, horror adjacent genre. What draws you to working with horror?
It's interesting. I mean, it's just I've always gravitated to darker genres,
Okay.
and the filmmakers I adore, like Lynn Ramsey, for instance, she's really just amazing with you love her too.
Yeah.
There's a lot to love. I mean, I just I'm interested in our shadow side. I'm interested in the dark side of humanity. I'm interested in the ways that we put on a mask and what that does to us and what is the truth. And so I think through horror, thriller, psychological horror, these genres really show the truth in a way that I think that drama can tend to meander into feeling like a PSA or
Yeah.
feeling quote unquote preachy. And so through the horror genre, you can talk about really depthful things in a provocative way. And so I've just always gravitated to that.
And so have you been a horror fan for a long time? Is it something you kind of grew up watching, or how did you kind of come into the genre as a viewer rather than as a creative?
You know what? I don't I grew up in a household where we always watch movies, but I was never like, oh my God, I'm a cinephile, you know.
Yeah.
I kind of stumbled blindly into filmmaking. I went to undergrad for engineering,
Oh,
and
really?
yeah, I went to Duke for initially biomedical engineering. And I know. You know, I've said it so many times that I assume people know, but I need to stop assuming people know this. I um I stumbled into a screenwriting class in my sophomore year at Duke because no matter what your major was, you needed to fulfill an English requisite. And it was just rumored to be a really interesting class. And I remember my professor, Elizabeth Banfi. I don't remember a lot, but I remember her name and I remember her. She's French and she's a French woman. And she was like, you have something here. Like we had to write a feature script. I didn't know anything about screenwriting. I didn't know anything about anything. And I just fell in love. And then when I realized that I could also direct the imagery that I put on the page, I was hooked. So I switched my major sophomore year. I mean, all this to say that, of course, I consume things like everyone else. Like
Yeah.
that's how you escape. You know, Drop Dead Fred, Freddy Krueger, Chainsaw, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like just all kinds of stuff. And then I really got into South Korean cinema,
Oh,
Audition, Park Chan-wook, Bong Joon-ho, and I was just like, oh my God, okay. So I can make a thing that feels like it defies genre conventions, like it's cross genre. And yeah, it's kind of a serpentine entry into filmmaking, but I would say sophomore year of undergrad is when I decided to switch my major to film
so cool.
production. Yeah.
Everyone watching, you can get into film whenever. There's no age.
Yeah.
I always feel like I tell people that there's no like age
It's
limit
true.
in
It's
getting into
true.
filmmaking and horror and anything like that. Like
Agree.
there's no age limit.
Agree.
And actually, I was curious about you're a professor at George Mason, correct?
Yes, yes. I'm a little over 3 years into being an assistant professor.
I I love academia and also hate academia, as you probably have dealt with. How do you balance being a professor and being a filmmaker? And I'm just so curious about that more personally than anything else, because that's kind of my dream to do like academia and creative at the same time.
So from undergrad, my dad was basically like, if you're serious about this, which it seems like you are, we want you to get a terminal degree in film production. Like I come from a family of people who value education.
Okay.
Parents went to college and so it's a big thing in my family. Everybody's highly educated. And so he felt like if I was gonna do this thing that nobody understood in my family, because you're a doctor, you're a lawyer. Nobody in my family's like, I want to be a filmmaker because it doesn't make sense. So he was like, get a terminal degree. And in his brain, it was a PhD. But the more I learned, the more I realized that no, if you're a practitioner, an MFA is a terminal degree. Like you can still teach at the collegiate level with an MFA. So we shortlisted film schools for grad school. He wanted me to go to London Film School. I wanted to go to NYU, and I secretly only applied to NYU. And thank God I got in. And I went straight from Duke. I didn't take a break. I just went straight to New York. And it sounds crazy. Every time I tell this story, I'm like, I know it sounds crazy, but New York is where I became a filmmaker. Like I made all my films there with the exception of my thesis film. And yeah, I got the MFA, and he was like, if you can't make films, the backup is that you can teach at the collegiate level. And so I started teaching in grad school, but as a teaching artist, like going around different schools, middle
Oh,
schoolers,
cool.
elementary schoolers, high school students, teaching them filmmaking. I taught with Tribeca Film Institute for a while. And then fast forward to now, I got an offer, to teach at George Mason. And so I left New York to be in Maryland to teach.
But my final question for you, not about Baltimore, but I want to talk about Baltimore. This is a movie that is so incredible for a lot of reasons, but we don't have this perspective in horror. Like you were listing off like Freddy Krueger, Texas Chainsaw. Like horror is really white. Like it's
Mm.
just aggressively white. So what does it mean for you to be able to show this movie to audiences and on a bigger platform like Prime? Like what is it? How does it feel to be able to have your story that is so unique and different than what we've seen before going to be available to like wide audiences and they can
It's
actually watch it?
surreal. I think it's been such a whirlwind of making the film
Yeah.
because like everybody got COVID in
Oh,
post. We shot at the
Jesus.
peak of the pandemic on location in
Yeah.
New York. We killed ourselves to make the Sundance deadline. We got in. That was a win
Yeah.
in itself. Did not expect to win the grand jury prize. So I'm still like in this sprint, it
Okay.
feels like, and I'm not present yet. Like my head is still spinning, but um I've just been so grateful for the response. You make something and you think, okay, my mom is gonna love it because she has to, but you don't think that you're gonna find like a real, I mean, we all hope that we will,
Yeah.
right? Um, but the response has kind of been overwhelming in the best ways possible. And I'm still processing it literally as I'm like pitching for next projects, locking in next projects, outlining and writing drafts of next projects. So I'm in this weird, I have my feet in like so many different steps of this process.
Yeah. And so what, or is there anything you can talk about that you're working on next? Tease anything?
Yeah, I can actually. My next project is set up at Monkey Paw. And oh, you have a sleeve too.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Full
That's
sleeve on this
really
end,
cool
and then
color. I
working on
love
this
it.
one. But yeah,
I
full
love
full
that.
sleeved.
I love tattoos.
Obsessed with tattoos.
So yeah, I'm working with Monkey Paw. We're in like draft 3 of the script, and it's an expansion of one of my shorts. That's I think that's as much as I can say
Amazing.
about that.
So
Yeah.
cool. Well, thank you so much, Nikyatu, for your time to talk about Nanny. I really appreciate it.
Questions, very self-aware questions. I appreciate
Of
you.
course. Of course.